Shabbat Shalom. I'm making this video to share with you some thoughts on the Torah portion for February the 5th, Parashat Teruma. And it reminds me of an old joke, what I'm doing now. And you'll see how old it is because the technology is today. But the old joke used to go like this. A man comes to a rabbi and says, "Rabbi, I love your sermons, and I have to be away this Shabbat. Is it okay if I videotape the service? I'll put it in the back. It won't bother anyone." And the rabbi, who has quite a large ego, says, "Of course, you can videotape it. Don't worry." And that's what the man does. He videotapes it. Anyway, a couple of weeks go by, and the rabbi notices that more and more people are not coming to services, and they're leaving videotape machines in their seats. And this happens more and more until finally one Shabbat, the custodian to the congregation has to come into the sanctuary to adjust the heat. And he noticed that there are no people in the sanctuary. There are 150 video cameras, and the rabbi is preaching from the screen of a television. So in its day, that was a funny joke. Today, of course, that's what we do. So I just had to mention that to you as a way of introducing this sermon done on tape or done on the computer, on video, because we're either going to be on Zoom or streaming. In any event, teruma, which means a sharing, a gift, usually to the Kohen, begins the section of how exactly to build the tabernacle in the desert, and of course, eventually the temple. Now, what's fascinating about this is that all of the other laws of Judaism in the Torah are not really that specific. Whether it's Shabbat or Kashrut, we get general rules. And as you know, the rabbis then fill in sort of the blanks, fill in the details. We know, for example, that you can't cook a baby goat in its mother's milk. And from that, the rabbis deduce the laws of meat and milk. Shabbat, we know you can't carry sticks on Shabbat, you can't light a fire, some other prohibitions, but it's the rabbis who determine the intricacies of Shabbat. Only when we come to the tabernacle, to the temple, do we have such specific references that we can actually do it ourselves. We could actually, from the blueprints in the Torah, construct a temple, a tabernacle. In fact, I have some show and tell for you. I love show and tell. I loved it when I was in kindergarten, and I love it now. There is a wonderful book, and the book is called The Tabernacle. And what it does is take the Torah writings and show you what it looked like. So our reading in this portion deals with, let's say, the parochet, the cover. And so we can see from the pictures, there is the cover, and it on the other side, of course, is the text of the Torah, and we know exactly how they're made. That's one picture. Here's another one, the cover for the Ark of the Covenant. You can see that beautiful cover, again, taken right from the Torah. And here's the most beautiful one of all. This is the finished product of what it looked like on top of the Ark of the Covenant in the actual tabernacle, and again, in the temple, both temples in Jerusalem. So obviously, this must be such an important type of action that the Torah goes to great lengths, and it covers a whole bunch of portions of Parshiot, especially in the books of the Torah, the middle books, usually Shemot and Vayikra, Exodus, the end of it, and Leviticus, about exactly not only how to build the tabernacle, but of course, all of the animal sacrifices. Now, today, we still have vestiges of that. For example, the idea of having a parochet, a cover before the ark with the Sifrei Torah, which every synagogue has, is taken from that idea of the parochet, the cover for the Ark of the Covenant. The eternal light is a symbol of the menorah that burned in the temple constantly. And so even though we no longer have a temple, we no longer have animal sacrifice, we still have vestiges of the temple, not only the temple decorations, but even the temple service. For example, on Shabbat and holidays, we have the Musaf. Musaf literally means additional service. And the Musaf service is patterned after the fact that on Shabbat and holidays, there was an additional sacrifice offered on those days. So I'd like to actually speak about the whole notion of animal sacrifice. It's something that we don't do today, of course, anymore, and we know the reason why. Basically, when the Second Temple was destroyed by the Romans, the temple no longer existed, and it could be able to sacrifices, and we actually transformed into Rabbinic Judaism, which is what we observe today. And the question is, would we still have sacrifices even today if the temple had not been destroyed? And what do we do now that the sacrifices are no longer with us? And of course, we know that answer. We have prayers. Although I should mention that we did even have the vestiges, the beginnings of synagogues, even before the end of the temple, the Second Temple. So the idea is, how do we continue the tradition? Now, I think for most of us moderns, the idea of animal sacrifice is really sort of just, how do I say? If I'm a kid, I'd say icky. It's really not pleasant. I have to tell you that as part of rabbinical school, a long time ago, we used to, when we spent the year in Israel, we used to go to Mount Gerizim, where the Shomronim, the Samaritans, live. The Samaritans are not Jews, they're Judophiles. They believe in the Jewish tradition, but they have their own Torah, their own tradition. And for them, Passover is what we call Pesach Sheni, the second Passover. And so they actually have animal sacrifices on Mount Gerizim every year on the second Passover, and they invite people to come. And of course, you pay admission to watch, and that's how they make some money for the community. But it's fascinating. It's very bloody, very gory, to be sure. But we went as rabbinical students to be able to try and get a sense of what it was like in the temple for the animal sacrifice. And no matter what you may think about it, the sacrificial system, as described in the Torah and practiced in the Tabernacle and the temples, two temples, although again in antiquity was a very intense, very important service that was very emotional. And the idea of animal sacrifice was, of course, standard among the ancient peoples. And so we took that, we modified it from what the pagans had done. And of course, the key part of any sacrifice was part of the communal meal. When it was sacrificed, it was also burned on the altar and roasted, and people would take part. It's not just for Passover that we know, for all the holidays. And so even the notion of a communal meal was something that was very important to everyone. Even today, of course, it's part of our tradition. For every holiday, for every simcha, even after a funeral, the mourners are supposed to eat. So breaking bread together is crucial. And that really comes from the notion of sharing from the temple. But I'd like to dwell for a few moments on the idea of sacrifice and what the rabbis say. Remember again, sacrifices really ended after the destruction of the Second Temple. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who escaped Jerusalem, was able to continue the notion of Rabbinic Judaism, which means that the Torah and its text is paramount. And of course, verbal prayer became the operating aspect of how we worship God. But in the Talmud, one of the rabbis says that today, he says in his day, God no longer listens to prayer. Very troubling and interesting statement. But in response, he says, but God does listen to tears. So what does that mean? What does it mean God does listen to prayer? God listens to tears. Well, most of the commentators say that what he's talking about is the fact that In the times of the temple, because the temple service was so dramatic, because it involved the killing of an animal and then the sharing of the meat afterwards as a meal, it was all inclusive, and one could not help but be inspired and have a sense of community and the intense feeling that one has at a sacrificial service. If you were there, it was very hard to go to the sacrifice and just sort of be blasé about it. It didn't allow you to. The nature of what happened was very intense. So what the rabbi is saying is that today, when we have prayers, it's easy to become distracted, which is true. Anyone, even those of us who pray every day, we say a lot of words. Even if we understand them, sometimes our mind wanders, we're tired, we don't maybe concentrate on what we are saying. And that's, of course, not correct. So that's the second part. So what they're saying in the Talmud is that today we have to pray through tears. In other words, with emotion. The prayers, the tefillot that we have, because it's not the same experience as going to an animal sacrifice. It's not the visceral, emotional event that it was in the temple times. Today, we need to approach our prayer, our words, with great feeling, like we're crying, in other words, like it really means a lot to us. We understand what it is. Of course, the word for that in Hebrew is kavanah. We have to have the proper kavanah in order to understand the meaning of the tefillot, the Hebrew, the philosophy of the rabbis that are in the tefillot, and how they relate to us. And I would argue that if we really do that in a very serious way, again, whether it's a Shabbat or even on Yom Kippur, which is the holiest of all days, we gain a lot from the idea of what we have to do for tefillot. Now, I believe that, and by the way, it was in the temple as well, music is crucial to tefillot, singing, tunes. We have the nusach, we have the tunes we sing for the tefillot, we have different songs that we sing, the hymns, all of that. It's crucial because, again, as human beings, if we just are reading words, sometimes we get distracted. But if we have a tune, if we sing together especially, then we are able to really be at one with the words on the page, and it inspires us. Just like even in the temple, even with the sacrifice and its intense ardor, there was, as you know from the Psalms, there was an orchestra, there was Leviim, the Levites, who played different instruments, there was a choir of Levites we know. So again, all of that, the music of the tefillot, of the service, no matter what day of the year, especially holidays, is crucial. And then one other thing that's, I find fascinating, at least, not just the tune and singing, but the notion of body language. One of the things that's fascinating about many Christian services, especially Catholics, but many mainline Protestants, is that there is prayer, but everyone sits very still. Sometimes, though, if you happen to go to a denomination, a Protestant denomination like Baptists and other evangelicals, they sing and dance and sway back and forth, very much like our Hasidim do, right? And so, in a sense, not only is music important, but we've developed, meaning that it was started by the Hasidim back in the 17th century. But even today, the fact that we move with the music, that we sway, that we have body language, all of that enables us to say our tefillot, to be at one with the words and what they mean. It makes it easier. So there are things that we have to do. It's not tricks, I would say, but certainly aspects of tefillah, of prayer. And perhaps, one of the problems that every synagogue has is to attract people who are not used to going to shul on Shabbat, let's say, perhaps through music, through movement, through an inspiration of what exactly are we talking about. By learning the meaning of the tefillot, we can inspire others to come to shul, not only for socialization, to meet other friends and be with people, which is, of course, is very important, but also to understand that the tefillah is a sacred task. And it's not to be a perfunctory matter. It's something that has to be looked at, examined, and done with the proper kavanah. And so the Torah portion for this Shabbat, although it deals in specifics, as I mentioned at the beginning of my little Devar Torah, about exactly what the has to be done to build the tabernacle, to decorate it. And then, of course, later we'll learn about the sacrifices themselves. Although it's very technical, it's done with a sense of great importance and great love, because, as I mentioned, every single detail here is mentioned, which is unlike anything else in the Torah concerning Jewish law. We have every single aspect of how to build and decorate the tabernacle, the temple, here in the portions during the middle part of the reading of the Torah during the year. And perhaps we can learn from that whatever we do, whether it's prayer, whether it's tzedakah, whether it's just life in general, we have to have the proper kavanah, the proper intent. We take life and we treat life with gusto. We enjoy life. We celebrate life. We want to do what we can to be with others and to help others and to enjoy what we have. We're a religion that wants joy, and we want to create joy. It's not a solemn, somber religion that simply has to chant a certain few words and we're done. No, it's part of who we are. And I think that's what's wonderful about Judaism. And just to add a little bit more to this idea, certainly when we raise our children, I think if we can raise our children as Jews to be Jewish with joy, to show how interesting and fun and inspiring Judaism is in terms of whether it's our home life, the synagogue, Jewish summer camps, whatever it may be, Jewish youth groups, all of that, to fully explore what it means to be a Jew today. There are certainly great challenges that are in front of us, but we can meet those challenges with the proper kavanah, with the proper intent. So we can take a lesson from today's Torah portion, from the sacrificial system, from how our tefillot should be said and sung, even in terms of life as a Jew. And with the joy of being Jewish, of observing Jewish tradition, of celebrating life every day as we can, which will help us, of course, when there are sad occasions, which always happens. But for the most part, joy is such an important part of Jewish life, important part of life in general, that we can hold our heads up high as we look to the future for the eternity and the continuity of the Jewish people. Shabbat Shalom. I hope to see you in person soon. And certainly for this weekend, I know there'll be a lot of different meetings, and I hope I can meet each and every one of you and speak with you one-to-one. Shabbat Shalom.